presentation at the Lincoln Community Center Library with Dr. Paris Baker, who will present on cognitive conception when men become fathers. And then Tuesday, we will be back in this room at 7 p.m. with Diane Chido, who will deliver a lecture on solving a 160-year-old mystery, the origin of the rebel yell.
And then Wednesday, we have a special virtual treat with one of our newest Ramey Fellows who will be presenting her research. Sarah McCall works within our public library system, and she will be presenting the role of public libraries in addressing the loneliness crisis. And that's virtual. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention this beautiful brochure. We have a month full of events still to come in our winter term, and as you know, in Erie, we probably still have a month full of winter to come. So we've got plenty for you guys. Please check that out on your way out. Finally, our speaker today. So it is my pleasure to introduce Karen Bilowith, who has led the Erie Community Foundation since October of 2021. Working with donors, nonprofits, and community leaders to enhance regional quality of life, and she serves on the board of the Pennsylvania Association of Community Foundations. If you didn't know, this year, the Erie Community Foundation is celebrating its 90th year of investment and impact in the Erie region, and today Karen will share with us more about that story and a bright look at our future. So please join with me in a warm JES welcome for Karen.
Well, thank you very much, Chelsea, for that introduction, and thank you to JES and our partners here for inviting us for this presentation. I see a lot of really friendly, familiar faces in the room, and quite a few of you as well, so I'm surprised and excited by the turnout today. Before we get started, I do want to recognize two of our team members who are here. Rick, where's Rick? Giles, who works with our philanthropic services team, and Kaylee Pisani, who's in the back and works with our communications team. So thanks for being here. If you have questions that I can't answer, they may be able to, or that you can't find me to answer, they may be able to help you out at the end of the day as well. So I'm gonna, I think, stand mostly behind here because of the mic and being able to really have everybody in the back here, although it feels a little bit stuffy. So I just want to recognize that right up front. Before we get started, show of hands, I have some audience participation today. How many of you in the room work for a nonprofit organization? Keep your hands up. How many of you serve on the board of a nonprofit or volunteer in some other way? Have contributed to a nonprofit? And finally, have gotten a grant from the Erie Community Foundation. So everybody, I hope almost everybody in the room at this point has their hand up. So I want to start off by thanking all of you. One of the reasons that we really appreciate our partnership with the Jefferson Society is that the mission of the Jefferson Society is so aligned with what we do. So their mission to engage and inspire conversation, communication, and civic engagement is very much in alignment with our mission to engage people in philanthropy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about philanthropy in general, talk about the Community Foundation, and also about our 90th anniversary, which Chelsea mentioned. So a lot of exciting things happening right now. Another chance for, so that's me. Chelsea talked a little bit about me. I'll tell you two things. So yes, I've only been here for about 3.5 years, so I'm not from Erie, but I do love Erie. People always say, what's your favorite thing about Erie? And one of my favorite things is the peninsula. Who couldn't love that? And another one of my favorite things is actually, and I'm not just saying this, to suck up, but I love the Jefferson. I think that this is a very unique organization within our community. So philanthropy in the United States has been happening for really hundreds of years, but does anybody want to venture to say what they think the definition of philanthropy is?
Well,
go ahead.
From the Greek, a lover of mankind.
Oh my gosh, that is exactly right. So, and for being so brave, we actually have, Kaylee's going to deliver a an Erie Community Foundation umbrella, which will come in very useful over the next few weeks, I promise you. Yeah, so generally speaking, we think about philanthropy in a very specific way in the United States, but actually philanthropy has been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years, through churches, tribes, communities, and it goes back to the root meaning of its love of humanity, love of mankind. In this country, philanthropy really formally started, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, with some of the early industrialists thinking about the ways that they would be giving back to the community. So think Carnegie, Rockefeller. And also even before that, as the country was just forming, and those of you who are historians might correct me, but Alexis de Tocqueville talked about the importance of giving back to the community as being part of the fabric of civil society. So that was really important as well to the developing custom and culture of philanthropy in this community. Community foundations as a thing started actually right next door in Cleveland in the early 1900s. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. A lot of people think about philanthropy in this country as relative to the income tax deduction that individuals receive by contributing to charitable organizations. And that was created in 1917. It did drive philanthropy in a lot of ways, but for years and years and years, study after study show that it's actually not even in the top 10 of the reasons why people say they contribute to community and to charitable organizations. So it's an incentive, but it's not the biggest motivator. I know I see some CPAs in the room who might disagree, but people give back to their community for a lot of different reasons. More recently, we've seen, the news is here, they asked me about what we're seeing in philanthropy, trends in philanthropy. And over the past, say, 10 to 15 years, across the country, nationally, we've really seen two different types of things. One is the rise of mega donors. So a lot of you may think of, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and these mega donors are really driving huge contributions into things like donor-advised funds, private foundations, and that is driving philanthropy. But grassroots philanthropy is really strong as well, and a lot of that has come about because of social media. We in our community know that to be true because Erie Gives, and I'll talk about that at the end, but Erie Gives raises almost $10 million last year. That is a significant amount of money for a community our size. It engages over 10,000 donors. So we know that grassroots philanthropy is really important as well. Every year, there's a study called Giving USA, which really gives some information on philanthropy generally in the community. And the numbers are somewhat mind-boggling. I can't actually, it's hard to think about this, but last year, and so the 2024 report actually is with 2023 numbers. It lags a little bit. But last year, $557 billion contributed to charity. One thing that I find somewhat concerning is that there has been a trend over the past several years that individual giving has decreased. And for the longest time, I used to stand in front of different groups of people and say that the most important giving to individual nonprofits in a community was individual giving, because it's about 70 to 80% of giving that a nonprofit receives comes directly from individuals, not from places like the Community Foundation. So when we see that declining, that is somewhat concerning, although it's still relatively small. The sectors that have seen increases in giving: education, I see my friends from Gannon, foundations. One of the things that's driving foundation growth is that, as I said earlier, the rise in what we think about as mega donors. Many of those individuals are contributing into donor-advised funds at community foundations and other types of charitable entities, and that's really driving a lot of the growth in philanthropy in the country right now. And you'll see arts, culture, and humanities grew, public society benefit grew as well. Bequests continue to be significant to the growth in philanthropy, and I'll talk about that later in the presentation. And corporate giving is a small but growing piece of the pie here in the Erie community. That's probably a bigger piece of the pie because we have several very philanthropic corporations, including Erie Insurance. So it doesn't go without note to say that. One of the things that we look at the foundation, and I think is really important, especially to all of you nonprofit development folks in the room, is that across the country, we've been talking about the transfer of wealth actually for over a decade. The transfer of wealth is happening when, as the baby boomers pass away, they are transferring the largest amount of wealth ever to the next generation. As that is happening, there is an incredible opportunity for us in the nonprofit community to capture some of that wealth. And I like to talk about it as if, think about the community as one of your heirs. As you take care of your family and plan for the next generation, think about leaving a small percentage to your community. Last year, the Pennsylvania Community Foundation Association actually commissioned for our transfer of wealth in Pennsylvania to be updated. So in terms of the wealth capture, so these numbers are real, and they just came out last year, that between 2023 and 2073, approximately $3 trillion will be transferred from one generation to the next in Pennsylvania. And we have that broken down by county in Pennsylvania. And if community foundations and other nonprofit organizations could capture just a little bit of that, say 5%, it would add up to $150 billion over the next 50 years, which would be a significant amount of annual giving to charities. I'm going to talk a lot about what our role is in philanthropy in this community, and this is really setting the stage for a huge and unique opportunity that the foundation plans to leverage over the next 10 years. I know Chelsea was very specific about questions. I also appreciate brief questions, but if you have questions as I go along, I do not mind at all if you raise your hand and ask them, because, I'm not a teacher, so getting up here and talking forever, it just puts me to sleep. So related to the transfer of wealth, one of the things that we will be doing at the Community Foundation is encouraging people to pledge part of their estate to either a fund at the Community Foundation, their favorite nonprofit, and we're working with professional advisors in the community to make sure that they understand how we can help facilitate that. So I'm going back again to the history of philanthropy. Here's my quote from Alexis de Tocqueville. The health of a democratic society may be measured by the quality of functions performed by private citizens. So this has always been part of the fabric of our community. One of the things that I've talked about since coming to Erie and assuming this role is that in order for everything, all of the momentum that's already happening in Erie around community and economic development, in order to really drive that forward, it requires the partnership and participation of the private sector, the public sector, and the philanthropic sector. So we're thinking about our work at the Community Foundation in that way all of the time. We can't do everything alone, so how are we helping to create the foundation for that work to happen so that we can continue to drive change forward? And I think that's going to be a theme that you'll hear me talk about, but it's not new. We didn't make it up. We've been talking about it for over a century. What is a community foundation? I should have asked somebody to give this definition because it's a little more complicated. Anybody want to guess what a community foundation is? A community foundation actually has a technical definition. This is not it, but a community foundation is a public charity. What does a public charity mean? It means that we get over 1/3 of our annual contributions from a diverse number of donors. We actually have to prove that, and I see our auditors back in the back, and they look at that every year, that 1/3 of our annual revenue comes from diverse donors, because that is one way that we're able to differentiate ourselves from being a private foundation. And there are different rules for private foundations than public foundations, and that is why we are part of that. So that's the technical definition. And the Community Foundation also is able to have under one 501c3, that's our charitable status, multiple funds that are all commingled and co-invested for the benefit of the community. Before community foundations existed, all of those individual funds had to be held separately as trusts, and it was just very cumbersome. So we provide a very unique way for people to contribute and give back to their community. I like to think about us more by this definition, which is really community foundations came together as a sector and said, what are the things that we do and we do uniquely in the community? And let's talk about ourselves in that way. So we're a partner that creates a better future for all by pursuing our greatest needs and opportunities and bringing people together, bringing people, institutions, and resources together to create community change. I'm going to talk about that throughout this presentation and give some specific examples. And while I'm doing that, I will call out some of our partners who are in the room that help us do that work. Quickly, as I said earlier, First Community Foundation was established in Cleveland. It was established by a businessman who actually said, we have all of these private trusts that are trying to do the work, but they don't know our community. What can we do so that we can get the money out the door? Basically, it's just sitting in the banks. So that's how Community Foundation started. Today, we are a sector. There are over 800 community foundations in the country, and we have significant assets. Does anyone want to guess where the largest community foundation is? Cleveland is one of the largest. It is the oldest, but not the largest. Unfortunately, it's not Erie. Yet. Tulsa, Oklahoma. I always raise this because to me that's fascinating. But Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it's largely because of the oil money that is in Tulsa. So the others that you mentioned are also among the top 10. Silicon Valley, New York, Cleveland. But together, as a network across the country, we provide a great resource in local communities. All community foundations are incorporated locally and have very localized impact. But one of the great things about being part of that larger network is we share best practices, we share learning, and if one of our donors moves to another community, we can actually make a connection to that community, often through the community foundation. So here's a little bit of a history of the Community Foundation, the Erie Community Foundation. As we've already said a couple times, we're celebrating our 90th birthday this year. We were founded in 1935 by Elisha Mack, the founder of the Boston store. And he set up an endowment to benefit the community. It's a really interesting story because the legislation that separated private foundations and public charities didn't exist yet. And the way that the Community Foundation was actually initially set up would have been a private foundation. But it was his vision to invite other community members to participate in giving, and also that the purpose was to benefit the whole community, which made it function like a community foundation. So then when that distinction was made in the late 1960s, Edward Dahl, one of our founding board members, one of our original board members, actually led a charge, and it took years for the IRS to recognize the Erie Community Foundation as a public charity. But that's when we became the Community Foundation as we're known today. And then since that time, I think a lot of you know this history because you've all lived here a long time. We have had great successes in growing things like the Erie Women's Fund, Erie Gives, partnering on a lot of different initiatives, and more recently with Emerging Erie, which is our Young Professionals, Young Leaders Fund, and then also the LGBT Fund. So why does it have 2035 on there? I'm going to get to that later. And I just want to shout out our board of directors. One of the technical definitions of a community foundation is that it has a local board of directors that represents the community. So there is our board. You probably recognize many of those faces. And one of our goals is to continue to grow our board, both in its diversity of all types, people from around the county, people of different ages, and also to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to the community that we serve. A couple of years ago, we went through a strategic planning process and updated our mission and vision statement. I'm not going to read these to you, but it was really a shift in terms of thinking not only as the Community Foundation as a vehicle for philanthropy, but really thinking about the Community Foundation as a driver of philanthropy and community change. And I was really proud to be part of that process and to come out with a vision statement that says we envision a united, vibrant, and thriving region for all. I mean, who doesn't, number one? But that shows that we're thinking outwardly and not just about the Community Foundation and our own success. And as part of that, what we say to our donors is that we are a trustworthy and permanent steward of your generosity. When a donor contributes to the Community Foundation, if they set up a fund to protect the trout in Lake Erie, we have to do that forever. We have to honor the donor's intent unless it becomes impossible to be fulfilled. If that happens, we actually have a superpower which allows the Community Foundation board to say, what's the next best use for those funds? What's most closely in alignment? And we're going to support that instead. So, we think about some funds that were established 100 years ago, which may have been for specific purposes that we don't really need anymore. So we're able to redirect those to different things. But in addition to that, we also say that when you contribute and work with the Community Foundation, you're part of something bigger. So it's through the power of collective generosity and collective giving that we're actually able to transform lives in our community. So what does that mean? What do we actually do? So we inspire, we cultivate a culture of giving. We do that in a lot of different ways. I always like to think about it as either like a pyramid or a funnel, but through Erie Gives, we engage thousands, 11,000 individuals in giving back to their community. That's very transactional. It might be a one-time gift, but they're learning about giving. People learn that you don't have to be a millionaire to participate in philanthropy. So we're cultivating that culture. We engage our donors in our work. We have so much knowledge about what's happening in the community through our grant-making programs that when a donor comes to us and says, I'd like to, through my fund, support this cause, we're able to say, hey, we know about these 3 organizations. Do you want us to tell you a little bit more about those organizations? So we're connecting donors to the causes that are important to them. And then we empower the community through the work we do around leadership and grant making. And I'm going to give a great example of how we do that with Infinite Erie. But in recognition of that work, one of the other things we do is convene a quarterly meeting of other funders in the community so we can all share information on what we're hearing as community needs, and we can all do our work better because of that. And Perry Wood with EGRA is an ongoing partner, not only in that, but in many of our efforts. There's a couple others that I don't want to miss anybody who's in the room, but we have a lot of different partners in that work. We also, as part of our goal to not only inspire a culture of philanthropy, but also to be really inclusive in our philanthropy, we do that through what we call our affinity funds. So these funds operate underneath our umbrella, but have a specific either affinity, purpose. So Erie Women's Fund, I see Gwen, who's former chair of Erie Women's Fund, but the Erie Women's Fund was formed more than 10 years ago to support organizations that are supporting women and girls. And over the past 10 plus years, they've grown in terms of their membership. They now have 200 members. They've grown $1 million endowment, and they give over $100,000 annually in grants. So that's a great way that we can spread our culture of philanthropy. Emerging Erie Fund is really going gangbusters. It's a newer fund. As I said, it's engaging people under the age of 40, sort of give or take, and they are the next generation of leaders in our community. And I am correcting myself even as those words come out of my mouth, because I hear them talking about their work and they say, we want to be the next generation, but we actually want to be it now. So they're not sitting back and waiting for us to give up the reins of philanthropy. They're actually taking them out of our hands and driving forward. And then the LGBT Fund has a really specific focus on helping to raise awareness about issues in the LGBT community, but also raise funds to support that community as well. So there are numerous other affinity funds that we could be involved with, but these grow from the bottom up. It's a grassroots effort of people coming together saying this is important, and we help facilitate that happening. And then we also have 4 regional affiliates, very similar to everything I'm talking about what we do. They do this at what I think about as the hyper-local level. So these are small communities within our Erie County footprint, and they each have grant-making programs, they work in their community, and they're all going very strong as well. Some of you may say, well, Findlay Lake is not in Erie County. I do know that. I did not know that, truth be told, when I first started at the Community Foundation. But the inspiration or the birth of Findlay Lake came from donors and contributors to the Erie Community Foundation who wanted to support Findlay Lake because they also have homes there. So that, again, grassroots, that's how it came about. And there are no rules about interstate community foundations. There are actually several examples of that across the country. So just real quick, 2024 was a good year for the foundation. We have over 2,000 gifts, our grants going out every year. 2,500, it goes up and down, and then that totals roughly between $20 and $30 million a year. It depends a little bit on giving from our advised funds, where donors may give grants, some large grants every year. Those go up and down a little bit. We receive roughly $20 to $25 million in gifts every year. About a third to half of that last year came from Erie Gives, and then occasionally we have a really strong year where we get an estate gift that comes through. So a couple of years ago, our gifts received was $60 million. And that's the nature of a community foundation. We're very different from other nonprofits because our annual giving goes up and down depending on when we receive estate gifts. So right now we're just over, we're about $438 million in charitable endowment funds, which are all committed to people and place in Erie County. Any questions yet? All right. So I asked this question earlier, but how many of you are familiar with or have written or received a grant from one of our grant programs? Yeah, so our community, we call it our Community Impact Grant Program, and that represents the grants that come from the funds that are contributed to the foundation by donors who say, we trust the foundation to know what the needs will be in the future, and we're going to give you what most people would think about as unrestricted funds. Those are, we have many, I think 119 individual funds where donors have said that, and then they support our annual grant-making programs. And these are the programs that nonprofits can apply to. So they're competitive, they all have different criteria. Helping Today is what we think about as our grant program that supports the capacity and ongoing programs, annual funding for nonprofit organizations. Those projects can apply for up to $50,000, and they really support the ongoing everyday operations of the organization. Our Shaping Tomorrow grant program is an opportunity for collaborative initiatives and sometimes individual organizations to say, hey, we want to take this initiative or this organization to the next level. We need your support to help us do that. So we look for a really strong proposal, but also other partners in the work, because up to $250,000 usually isn't enough to make that happen. But this is where we have other donors and other partners to help us help the organizations get to their goals. And then our transformational grants are, I think, what get the most attention. People hear about these because they're big. They're important. They're exactly what we say. Transformational means something is happening that is going to change the trajectory of our community. So this has very specific criteria around creating meaningful changes in the lives of people. One of the things that we talk about related to our transformational grants, some of the grants that we have done have been in pure economic development area, what you might think about as economic development. the question that the Community Foundation Board always asks as we're coming in as a partner, as a funder in these initiatives is there a benefit to the community generally and to people? Because that's our charitable mission. So we're not going to invest in a private company that is relocating downtown, but we invest in EDDC because they're helping to make that happen. EDDC also, and I see Drew over there, has been helping to create the environment for businesses to be successful in downtown, which is something that we've been really interested in and that we support through our transformational grants. And then we want to be responsive, so we have some small grant programs that we can do very quickly that respond to urgent needs. I saw James, I think, in here. When the MLK Center, all that snow came down and they couldn't plow their lot, which was really important to the ongoing operation of the center, we helped with a small urgent grant to address that need. So those are and ACORN grants are really to help organizations that are trying to, they're not really startups, but they're trying to build their capacity as an organization. So ACORN grants often fund organizations to participate in programming at the nonprofit center or the nonprofit partnership, for example. And I just wanted to, put the list up there of our transformational grants because we're really proud of those. But this isn't the exhaustive list, but I hope many of you know that we invested in Erie County Community College, really helped get that off the ground. The McGee Women's Research Institute, the Erie Chamber, and the Experience Children's Museum. And then more recently, when United Way wanted to expand its community schools model into the high school, we were able to provide support to help make that happen. As we move forward into not only our 90th anniversary, but our next phase of transformation in the community, our board has also been thinking about what other tools do we have besides grant making in our toolbox. So you saw that number earlier, $438 million. That's a lot of money. We don't have access to that money because it's in permanent endowment, number one, and a lot of it's restricted by the donors for specific purposes. But could we use that money creatively and innovatively in other ways to help our community? So we've started doing what are called mission-related investments. So still have to go toward charitable endeavors, but we have done some loans to organizations. We could do something like a loan guarantee. We can do a lot of different things using those assets that we have under our umbrella to create opportunity for organizations. And then when those assets come back, they go back in to support our mission. And this is something that as I said, we've done already in a couple of specific instances, and we're really thinking about how we can best utilize that program to spur a lot of catalytic development for organizations in our community. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This was a slide we did for our board recently, but it is important to the question of, you have $438 million. Why are you only giving away $3 million? Or why are you only doing this? And this just shows how those assets are divided. So Erie Gives, of that total amount granted last year, Erie Gives was over 1/3. Many of our grants go out through donor-advised funds where the donors make the recommendations on the nonprofits, and we verify that they are doing what they say they're doing and that they're valid or eligible to receive a grant. And that general unrestricted, that's our fund that we have to do all of those grant programs that I was talking about. And in the grants and the fund type, the pie looks the same because we give an annual distribution of 4% every year from all of our funds. Any questions? Yes?
You have one, all right.
Yeah.
So I couldn't see with your DAFs, what percent was in there on DAFs?
In the donor advised funds, the percentage of, it's about 20% asset-wise.
Right.
And then a little higher, 23% grant-wise.
Gotcha. How much is getting pushed out? Because, one of the challenges is that oftentimes people sit on those, and it's, it becomes a question then of, how, I know you're limited in what you can do to encourage them to, hey, push the money out, and then it becomes contingent upon the nonprofits to hopefully message in a way that inspires them to do so. But there's that whole trend of people actually parking that money and
Yep.
and it really not being distributed year to year. So I don't know what you can do to encourage that more, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you. Thank you for asking it, because in the community foundation world, in our sector, we actually have a whole campaign, a national advocacy campaign focused on how community foundations buck that trend, is the easiest way to say it. So a couple of things. Community foundations, private foundations have a 5% annual payout distribution requirement. Community foundations do not have that requirement, but we actually distribute much more in terms of grants versus total assets, because the way we look at it is total assets. That doesn't really answer the question of each individual donor-advised fund, but what we see here in Erie is that our donor-advised funds typically grant well over the 4%. Many of ours are endowed, which is a different type of question, because then they're only distributing 4% each year, but many of them do more. We actually, we have a policy that we approved, our board approved maybe 2 years ago, which all of our donor advisors sign, which says that they will at least every 3 years make a grant. So unless they have a plan, like we have a plan agreed upon where they're growing the fund, maybe for their children or for a specific purpose. So we've actually addressed that head on to say, at a community foundation, that's not really what we're all about. We're about giving, working with you to support the community. And then on the side of what you said about, donors, maybe how can we help donors understand what the needs are? That is also part of our mission to make those connections. So we have a lot of different ways we do it. It depends on how actively the donors want to be engaged. But we have conversations all the time with our donors to say, we've funded these 5 projects, but we couldn't give them as much money as they asked for, and sometimes they'll make up for it. So we try to do, we feel like that is our obligation to the community to do that kind of work. Very good question. All right, so I talked a little earlier about our role in terms of what we call community leadership, but as the Community Foundation, we truly are a neutral institution in the community that can bring people together to talk about sometimes difficult issues. We understand that people, when we invite them, also show up, and that's because we have the money. But I think we don't take that lightly. We actually take that as a big responsibility, that if we're inviting people to the table to have conversations, that there's going to be action around that. And a really good example of this work is our work with Infinite Erie. So show of hands, have people heard about Infinite Erie? A little bit familiar? I'm not going to talk a lot about it because they've done a lot of programming through the Jefferson Society. But the Infinite Erie came about a few years ago after Bruce Katz came from New Localism Associates, came to Erie and helped through funding from the Jefferson Society, EGRA, the Community Foundation, Erie Insurance, helped us as a community identify truly transformative projects that would help change the trajectory of Erie. Why was he interested to come to Erie? One of the reasons was we had already started this work through the Erie Downtown Development Corporation. We had shown as a community that we could raise resources and that we could come together. But what he discovered, and we all knew probably already, is we have a lot of plans and a lot of different priorities. So Infinite Erie came out of this work which said, there are 35 projects that if you act on those, that will help transform Erie and build momentum for future development. The role of Infinite Erie is really, people always say it's so hard to understand. It's actually fairly simple. It's not a pot of money, but it's rather a way to facilitate the conversation, to build the table, facilitate the conversation, and help projects get to the point where they will be successful in leveraging funding, not only from the Community Foundation and other local entities, but from national foundations and federal funders. So the Community Foundation has been supporting this work since its inception, both financially and with our staff as part of the Board of Managers and as part of the action teams. The reason that we are doing this as a community foundation is because the projects under Infinite Erie's umbrella can transform lives in our community. We will not, as a public charity, fund every single project that's in that playbook, but the ones that relate to building neighborhoods, building community, changing health outcomes, those are the things that we're really interested in. And we use this as our opportunity to build support so that we can't be the only funder. We don't have enough money so that we can help our community achieve these goals. So there has been some media attention to this recently, but I think it's really important that people understand that we actually have, through Infinite Erie, leveraged close to $44 million in the past couple of years. That's a lot of money. It's not insignificant, and it's not that the work isn't already happening. And you'll see the breakdown. And a lot of that has been local, because local money needs to be the leverage for bringing in some of the national money. We know through some work that we did around economic impact, and these are just numbers for the capital projects, that if all of the projects in the playbook are implemented, they'll have significant impact, over $500 million in economic impact, jobs, and taxes. So one of the projects that I'm going to just focus in on for today is the work that the Community Foundation under Infinite Erie and other partners have done around developing a comprehensive homelessness response strategy. It's fascinating to me, and because I've worked in other communities, to see that developing a comprehensive homeless strategy came out of an investment playbook focused on economic and community development. It was really driven by business owners, city public officials, talking about the need to have to change the way people were using downtown, to change the fact that we had people who are chronically homeless living unhoused in our community. So we've been working for over 2 years on this issue. Many of you might recognize in the middle, Boo Haggerty from Hammett Health Foundation. And I'm not going to go into all of the detail of it, but we identified that if we work together, we could actually help relieve the burden around chronic homelessness. So we've worked over the past 2 years with the city, the county, the Hammett Health Foundation, the Community Foundation, and many others to think about how do we change our system from one that is always being reactive, from one that is always relying on a shelter-based system where people fall out of the system instead of finding permanent supportive housing for individuals. The solution is what we call permanent housing first and permanent supportive housing. These pictures are in Boise, Idaho, and in Cleveland of what that looks like in a community. We know that we can do this here in Erie, and we have now identified a location where we will eventually house up to 75 or 72 individuals who are chronically homeless permanently, and wrap supportive services around those people so that they are actually getting the help they need. And it's based on a whole theory that I don't have time to go into today, but best practice across the United States has been working in other communities for decades, and we have the solution now. We just need to activate our team and the resources to transform what we're now calling schoolhouse apartments. So you may recognize that building as the former Erie Public Schools Administrative Building at 21st and Sass. That is going to become a 22-unit permanent supportive housing unit with space on the same property to then build an additional 50 units. So we're really excited about this. It doesn't solve the whole issue. It's only one piece. We know there is an increase in family homelessness, women and children. We work with partners across the community, Mercy Center, many others, on all of those issues. But it's changing the way that we address the problem so that we can come up with some permanent solutions. Over time, Infinite Erie really wants to support the entire housing continuum, because we know we need, as a community, we need supportive housing, but we also need affordable and workforce housing and market rate housing. Infinite Erie has projects in every one of those buckets, because as a community, we don't want to just focus all on one end or the other. We need to think about a comprehensive approach. And okay, I'm changing gears really quickly because I'm looking at the clock and I want to have time for questions. But Kaylee and Aaron Fessler would not let me leave the room unless I talk about Erie Gives, which is actually one of the most unique things about the Erie Community Foundation, is that we started Erie Gives to mark our 75th anniversary. So that was 15 years ago. And I wasn't here at that time, but when Erin talks about it, she said, the Community Foundation thought about it as, we'll try it and maybe it'll be like a one and done. But thanks to the Erie community, it was so successful that year after year, we kept doing it. And I don't really think about it as, it's not the Community Foundation, it's the community that makes this successful. And now that we're on the 15th anniversary, as I said, last year we raised over $9.7 million. We're setting our sights on that 10 million, but it's become part of not only the philanthropic fabric of our community, it's really important to all of the individual nonprofits that participate. And that's something coming in from the outside I didn't really understand, because I had seen giving days in other communities where it was an organization always wants the money, but here the organizations participate, they help they say to their donors, wait and give on Erie Gives Day. They organize, they promote, they embrace it because it provides really important operational support that they count on for that year. So not only can we not stop the train, and anyone who knows Aaron Fessler is like, you don't ever stop that train anyway. But not only can we not stop the train, but we have to keep it moving because it's so important to the nonprofits in our community. So this year, August 12th, it's always the second Tuesday in August, will be our 15th annual Erie Gives. And we're really excited to see what is new for this year. I'm not going to give away any, maybe it's on here. I don't know. So a couple of key things. Over $66 million raised since Erie Gives inception. That's incredible. Last year, was it last year? We went to 24 hours, which has also been really successful. And this year we are, and I think the nonprofits all know this already, but we're covering all online fees using our sponsorships for Erie Gives. That was the biggest thing that we heard from donors, was they didn't like, there have always been fees, the fees became more transparent with our new system, and people don't like that. So we are using the bonus, or not the bonus bucks, but we're using our corporate sponsors to help us cover those fees, and we expect that we'll just see an increase in gifts just because of that. So I already talked about this multiple times. It's our birthday. Our annual meeting on June 12th will be our birthday party, our celebration. So look for an invitation to that. We're really using this 90th anniversary not just to have a big celebration. There are a couple of at least one other anniversary in our community. And is this year or last year Gannon's? It's this year. So Gannon and Erie Insurance, we don't want to take away your steam. So we're really using our 90th anniversary to launch an effort to encourage people to give $100 million over the next 10 years so that on our 100th anniversary, we have that much more looking forward to the future. Because like I said earlier, we know we don't know what the issues are going to be in the future, but we know our community foundation will need to be here, the support will need to be here. So we're really excited to engage more people in our work over the next 10 years. So many ways you can get involved. If you're interested at all in any types of the funds at the Community Foundation, Rick is your guy. If you're with a nonprofit organization and you haven't thought about an agency endowment fund, Rick is your guy. Join an affinity fund, and I hope you all already participate in Erie Gives. And we don't have a lot of opportunities for volunteers at the Community Foundation. However, I just encourage you to volunteer generally with a nonprofit where you can make a big, huge impact. So, and I want to call out Emmy. I don't know, there she is. With the nonprofit, oh, there she is. With the nonprofit partnership, because I haven't mentioned them yet, but the nonprofit partnership is a partner in everything that we do. They are on our campus and are a great resource to all of the nonprofits in our community. So talk to Emmy if you have any questions about volunteering with a local nonprofit, and she might be able to help. Whew. All right. We're tight on time. I'm happy to stay, but I don't know if you have any questions, if anybody follow the directions.
I have one question.
Okay.
My question is with the,
Please wait for the mic.
Oh, please wait for the mic. Sorry.
my question is with the sort of the overhead for the online giving now being covered, is there really an incentive for someone to still want to just give by check in advance?
So we will have both the bonus bucks and the fees. We're going to raise more money from our sponsors so we can do both.
Okay, yeah, I guess it's just really personal
Yeah.
for me because last year I chose to
Yeah.
pay by check and make a lot of lists in advance.
Yeah.
That way, knowing there wouldn't be any of those service fees. And I'm wondering if that, am I still incentivized just personally thinking it's more money for others
Yeah.
if I just write a check in advance?
You are still incentivized to do that. So thank
Okay.
you. Thanks
Thank
for your
you.
previous gift and hopefully your future gift.
I thought I heard you infer that donor advised funds, there are restrictions that the donor can't just pick where the money goes?
I'm not sure if I said it exactly that way. So the way that donor advised funds work is that, so if anybody isn't familiar with that concept, donors can contribute to the Community Foundation. There are other entities that do this too, to what's called a donor advised fund, and the donors are able to make recommendations on the distributions going out of the fund. Legally, our board approves all of those recommendations, and we make sure that it's an organization that is eligible to receive a charitable gift. So we check with the IRS database, and basically that would be the only reason we couldn't if it's not a 501c3 public charity. Does that answer your question? I don't know the context of exactly how I said it. Sorry, do you have a follow-up? I'll repeat it. You can just say it to me. You don't have to wait for the mic.
Well, my family has a fund, endowment, whatever, at the Community Foundation. And when our representative went and asked to have funds given to certain organizations, we were told you only can have donations to this list. If they're not on the list, you can't give to them.
All right, that sounds like a really specific thing, so we'll have Rick follow up with you because it may be that there might have been language in the original agreement that have some restrictions. So we follow restrictions that are given to us by the donor, or there are certain things that you cannot give to, like events or sponsorships. So just follow up with Rick and we'll answer that question.
Good afternoon. My name is Dean Brown. I just want to first say congratulations and thank you for everything you do for our city and our community. I just recently started my own athletic company called Neuromotions Athletics. It's a skills training program tailored for neurodiverse students. What advice would you give a new business owner that's trying to make an impact and inspire within his business and the community?
So a couple of things. Are you a nonprofit organization or
It's a LLC
Okay.
right now.
All right. So because it sounds like the work that you do has a charitable aspect to it, I would encourage you to talk with NPP and Emmy to find out other nonprofits that are, find some partnerships. So if you're a for-profit, you can still work with nonprofits to help, mission-aligned work. That's part of my advice. Get involved in the community and find out what's going on that is in alignment with your business interests, because our nonprofit community is very strong. It's embedded here, so it can actually help your business to align with some nonprofits in the community.
Thank you very much.
Once an individual has established an endowment with the foundation, what's the administrative cost assessed to that endowment?
It depends on the type of the fund that it is, but we have two levels of fees. One is a small, we call it a community investment fee, which is supporting the work of the foundation. I like to tell people that because all the work we do is mission related, that it's a fee, but it goes back into the community in terms of the work we do. And then the fee that we pay to the investment managers who manage all of, the 348 million in assets. So it depends on the fund, but under 2%, no matter what the fund is.
Thank you. Hi, recovering executive director of a nonprofit, but current consultant. So when I meet with clients, a lot of the questions, my first question to them is like, what project do they want to fund? And then when they say, well, what do you mean project? I just want to keep the lights on and pay my people and cover overhead. So what kind of conversations are you having with your grantors about covering those sort of costs that seem to be more of a burden to our nonprofits than just so they can just execute what they're already doing without having to make up some program or project so they can get that grant funding?
Right. So depending on our grant program, for our unrestricted funds, most of our unrestricted funds will cover things like that. So as a funder, we're demonstrating that that's really important. Also, as I said before, that's one of the biggest reasons why I think is important for us to keep doing Erie Gives, because that money goes toward just operational funds. I think it's a really important conversation that I've spent like my whole 20 years working in philanthropy having with donors, is that there is not as much redundancy and duplication as you might think, and it's really important to fund the capacity of nonprofit organizations. They have to be strong in order to deliver their services, period. So that's something we do all the time. Most of the grants that are going out of our so if a donor sets up what we call a designated fund, mostly that happens through their estate. So they say, I want to support these 5 organizations. All of those are unrestricted. Most of our donor advised fund gifts. So as a foundation, we really don't deal with that as much, but I think it's a really important issue in the nonprofit sector. So we are on board with, advocating for our nonprofits and telling why that supporting what is considered to be operations or overhead is really important. Any other questions?
If there's no more questions, and if we could have a round of applause for Karen today.
I'm sorry,
yeah,
but
go for it.
I think that the first question came from, You already got the umbrella, though, for philanthropy. The second question came from the gentleman in the back, I think, about the donor advice fund, so you get the second umbrella. So thank you for your active engagement.